Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gosztola. I'm the managing editor for Shadowproof, also the curator of the Dissenter newsletter. It's good to be talking with you. I'll be breaking down a BBC News segment that aired the morning of the British High Court's decision against Julian Assange and in favor of the US government in the extradition case that took place on December 10th. And the High Court of Justice ordered the decision to be sent back down, ordered the extradition request to be sent back down to the district court to then be signed off on and brought to the desk of the Secretary of State in Britain so that it could also be considered and approved, and the U.S. could extradite WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. But Julian Assange's legal team appealed. They intend to appeal and will submit their appeal, saying that the diplomatic assurances offered by the United States should not be considered good enough, and it was wrong for the High Court of Justice to believe that they are good enough to deal with all the concerns about how Julian Assange would be treated in prison or in jail in the United States. So here's the segment. I'll play the segment, which includes or features Rebecca Vincent, who is an international campaigns director for Reporters Without Borders. And they do exceptional work. They put out a very strong statement after the High Court's decision as she appeared on, and the BBC News anchor, her name is Geeta Guru-Murthy, and she will watch and we'll play it all the way through, and then I'll go back and I'll break it down.
Well, I'm joined now by Reporters Without Borders' Rebecca Vincent, who's been attending Mr. Assange's court hearings and monitored this one remotely. Mr. Assange is going to have to face justice eventually in the US, isn't he?
Well, I would frame it completely differently because I don't think this is a question of justice. We were extremely concerned about the substance of the January decision, which did not find in favor of press freedom or journalism. The ruling against extradition was, of course, only on mental health grounds, which is why we've now ended up in this situation today. But for us, this case is absolutely about journalism. Julian Assange has been targeted for his contributions to journalism for publishing information in the public interest. And the case that he might face in the US is based purely on the fact that the US Espionage Act does not have a public interest defense, allowing them to bring this case against a publisher for the first time. So the implications that this could have for journalism around the world are really alarming. This will set a dangerous precedent for many years to come if there is not success in another step of an appeal here.
Well, obviously, prosecutors say that this isn't about journalism. This is about theft of data that actually made people vulnerable, people across the US in government positions, and was utterly wrong. And, you know, ultimately, if he believes in his case, why doesn't he just go and argue his case in the US?
He is facing possibly 175 years in prison in a high security facility where he would very likely, despite the US assurances, be held in isolation in conditions of solitary confinement, whether or not it's special administrative measures. This is somebody who is not well, who is well documented to have severe mental health issues. He is unlikely to survive these conditions. So let's put it that clearly. This is a matter of possible life or death for Julian Assange.
Well, that is not what has been decided today. In fact, they've said that the mental health issues, are not serious enough to back Assange's case here. And at the end of the day, the US is a democracy. There are protections within its whole judicial system and its criminal justice system.
Well, this is frankly appalling decision by the UK High Court, which is gambling with Julian Assange's life. But I don't want to focus just on the humanitarian concerns here, because this is, for us and for many other free expression organizations around the world, a politically motivated case. He has been targeted for publishing information in the public interest. That should not be a crime. US law needs to be amended, and we quite frankly will continue to campaign for his release in the same way that we do in countries around the world that imprison journalists, publishers, and sources. This case has to be seen for what it is.
Rebecca Vincent from Reporters Without Borders, many thanks.
And so there's that full segment. I was unable to pull it without those two little pop-ups at the end with the BBC logo and then the square for the other story on Boris Johnson that nobody wants to watch. So I'm sorry that that was obstructing Rebecca at the end there, but you're still able to hear her point clearly, her closing point. And all right, so let's break this down.
I'm joined now by Reporters Without Borders' Rebecca Vincent, who's been attending Mr. Assange's court hearings and monitored this one remotely. Mr. Assange is going to have to face justice eventually in the US, isn't he?
Mr. Assange is now going to have to face justice, isn't he? In the United States, he's now going to have to face justice. What kind of opening question is that? Normally, when you go on these shows, you get asked, what's your response to, and then they'll say the news event. A good opening question for this anchor would have been, what's your response to the British High Court's decision granting the United States government's appeal? And then Rebecca is set up and she gets to say what her message is, what her organization's position is on all of the latest developments. And then the anchor can respond and engage. And if she wants to test what Rebecca is saying, that's acceptable to some degree. But you don't start from a point of hostility where you're clearly showing that you have a view and it isn't the one of your guest.
I would frame it completely differently because I don't think this is a question of justice. We were extremely concerned about the substance of the January decision, which did not find in favor of press freedom or journalism. The ruling against extradition was, of course, only on mental health grounds, which is why we've now ended up in this situation today. But for us, this case is absolutely about journalism. Julian Assange has been targeted for his contributions to journalism for publishing information in the public interest. And the case that he might face in the US is based purely on the fact that the US Espionage Act does not have a public interest defense, allowing them to bring this case against a publisher for the first time. So the implications that this could have for journalism around the world are really alarming. This will set a dangerous precedent for many years to come if there is not success in another step of an appeal here.
Well, obviously, prosecutors say that this isn't about journalism, this is about theft of data that actually made people vulnerable.
Theft of data that made people vulnerable. Well, the case is actually targeting the publication of information. Julian Assange, WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, did not steal any data. He published the information. The source, Chelsea Manning, was accused and convicted of crimes that involve theft. But Julian Assange was not prosecuted and is not being prosecuted for the theft of data. And then this idea of making people vulnerable. Well, yes, the people who were detailed in these military incident reports, military reports from Iraq, from Afghanistan, these military reports did have content that described what was going on day to day in that war, but they were historical documents. These were not real-time documents in which people from any extremist groups or militias aligned against the United States could use those documents in order to discover details on troop movements and then mount coordinated attacks.
Across the US in government positions and was utterly wrong.
And so then she doesn't even really say the thing that a lot of the anchors fall back on. This was in the Morning Joe clip. She's actually seems to be talking about the diplomats in the US government who were exposed to scrutiny through the release of the 250,000 plus diplomatic cables. And in fact, PJ Crowley, the former spokesperson for the State Department, has conceded that it is very difficult to quantify the impact on diplomacy. And I'll get to this in a little more detail further on in this clip. But those people in the positions right now in the State Department have no difficulty doing their work because of the WikiLeaks publications. There's been no foreign policy objective on the part of the United States that was not achieved because of WikiLeaks.
And, you know, ultimately, if he believes in his case, why doesn't he just go and argue his case in the US?
Why doesn't he just go and argue his case in the US? He doesn't go argue his case in the US. He's not eager to go be prosecuted in the US because he doesn't believe, and it's very well-founded belief, that he committed any crimes. So why should he have to go stand trial in the United States? Why does he have to martyr himself in order to prove that what he did was right and just? And also, he can't make his case in a court. There is no public interest defense. And Rebecca will explain that to her.
He is facing possibly 175 years in prison in a high security facility where he would very likely, despite the US assurances, be held in isolation in conditions of solitary confinement, whether or not it's special administrative measures. This is somebody who is not well, who is well documented to have severe mental.
What is she doing? Can you hear that? She's like, while Rebecca's trying to make a point, she's like, can you hear like moving her hand like what I'm doing right now, like making her microphone, like adjusting it and fiddling rather than sitting still and listening to what Rebecca is saying. It's so disrespectful. Stop moving. Listen to what she's saying.
Health issues. He is unlikely to survive these conditions. So let's put it that clearly. This is a matter of possible life or death for Julian Assange.
Well, that is not what has been decided today. In fact, they've said that the mental health issues, are not serious enough to.
That is not what they said. The High Court did not say at all that the mental health issues are not serious enough for the court. What they determined was that the diplomatic assurances were enough for the High Court to believe that the US government would treat Julian Assange humanely and that they would safeguard his well-being while he is in jail or in prison. And if he's not going to be put in a supermax prison, which there's a loophole for that, but if he's going to not be held there, and then if he's not going to be held in special administrative measures, which again, there's a loophole for that, but if he's not going to be in these confinement conditions, then they believe that the facilities are likely to treat him much better and differently. And so they believe that the facilities would be able to manage his mental and physical health. So they're willing to turn him over to the United States government. But in their decision, they actually upheld the conclusion that was drawn by District Judge Vanessa Baretzer when she applied a test and concluded that Julian Assange would be incapable of resisting suicidal impulses and would likely take his own life in prison. Because, of course, though, that was concluded based on the fact that the US government had led the judge to believe that Julian Assange could possibly end up in a supermax prison. They did not take that off the table. They did not go above and beyond to try and take that off the table so they could salvage their case. And again, it's still possible he could go there. They say if he commits some future act, he could be put in a supermax prison. And what could that be? They don't define what that future act might be. And if some official in the CIA or in any national security agency that gets to advise the Justice Department makes some conclusion that recommends he be put in a supermax prison cell, then he's likely to be designated for one if he is convicted.
To back Assange's case here. And at the end of the day, the US is a democracy. There are protections within its whole judicial system and its criminal justice system.
Well, this is
please come to the United States. Geeta, please come here, do some reporting on the US incarceration system, talk with some of these groups that work on these issues, because people in the United States are living in conditions where they could be beaten, they might be stabbed. You might find that you are sexually assaulted or raped by officers who are working, guards that are working in those facilities. You are denied medical care. You are sometimes denied food, recreation. There's retaliation that takes place, harassment, intimidation, and the wardens and senior officers who are supposed to provide oversight and prevent these kinds of abuses are complicit, oftentimes engaged in these acts against prisoners. Well documented. It's all well documented. And even the high court has heard cases where they've been brought a litany of examples of the abuse that unfolds daily in the U.S. incarceration system. This judicial system has rampant due process issues within it, and those are not being circumvented. The fact of the matter is that the High Court isn't saying that there aren't problems in the U.S. justice system or the U.S. incarceration system. They're just saying the U.S. has made some pledges, and they're going to be looking after Julian Assange to try and make sure that things that routinely happen in the U.S. prison system don't happen to Julian Assange. And obviously, that's hard to believe because they are so hostile towards Julian Assange. Why would they spend their time being good to Julian Assange to make sure he has any different treatment than other people that are put in jail or in prison? So I'll let Rebecca finish her thought here.
Frankly, a polling decision by the UK High Court, which is gambling with Julian Assange's life. But I don't want to focus just on the humanitarian concerns here, because this is, for us and for many other free expression organizations around the world, a politically motivated case. He has been targeted for publishing information in the public interest. That should not be a crime. The US law needs to be amended, and we quite frankly will continue to campaign for his release in the same way that we do in countries around the world that imprison journalists, publishers, and sources. This case has to be seen for what it is.
Rebecca Vincent from Reporters Without Borders, many thanks.
All right, so there's just a few things to add to that segment. First off, we're talking about BBC News, which is a public media in the UK, which means that there is some state identification going on here. They have to believe, as anchors of BBC News, that the judicial system of the United Kingdom is being fair and reasonable towards the defendant. Because if not, then they are looking at a system that is corrupt. And I don't think they want to acknowledge the corruption within the British High Court of Justice, the collusion with corruption in the United States. And so that's part of why we hear what we're hearing from Geeta. But also, we know that the BBC had a Home Office correspondent or a Home Affairs correspondent who was assigned to cover this case and was expected to produce reporting during the extradition hearing, the main one where witnesses were called before the judge to give testimony by Julian Assange's legal team. This was in September of 2020. And this Home Affairs correspondent, his name is Daniel Sanford. I'll just put it up on the screen there. He was confronted by Media Lens, who asked, as Home Affairs correspondent for BBC News, where is your reporting of the Julian Assange extradition hearing? And then Daniel responded and said, the case is being covered by our World Affairs unit. I have been in a few hearings, and it is slightly repetitive at the moment. It will return as a news story. So, generally speaking, there are people at the BBC who didn't recognize the news value of having people there every day during the extradition hearing in September 2020, when the district judge was hearing all of these issues, hearing issues related to U.S. prisons, hearing issues related to freedom of the press and press freedom conditions in the United States, and journalism, and why soliciting leaks is not criminal in the United States, why it's covered by the First Amendment, which the United Kingdom does not have. Geeta doesn't have the same kind of protections as an anchor that news anchors in the United States have, that other journalists at organizations like CNN have. BBC News lacks that kind of protection. They should want to have fuller protection in their country. They have an Official Secrets Act that they have to abide by. The U.S. doesn't, although the Espionage Act currently functions like a de facto Official Secrets Act. But they have less protection in their country than I do in the United States. So she should take this more seriously, except it's clear that she's not really interested in performing investigative journalism, and she's more interested in hosting a news program. And so on this show, she actually has had trouble before when it comes to the Assange case. This was written by John Pilger. Sweden announced they were dropping their case back in 2017, the case that was based on sexual allegations against Julian Assange. And John Pilger came on BBC World News. Geeta was on as an anchor and referred to, quote, charges against him. There were never official charges brought against Julian Assange. She accused Assange of putting Trump in the White House, and she drew Pilger's attention to the fact that leaders around the world had condemned Julian Assange. And she said some of those leaders include Trump's CIA director. So we'd be talking about Bloody Gina. Bloody Gina Haspel. Gina Haspel, the first woman director of the CIA, or I guess at that time it would have been Mike Pompeo. So either way, Mike Pompeo, who is now implicated in plotting to kidnap or kill Julian Assange. And so that prompted John to ask Geeta, are you a journalist? A good question. I'm sure she didn't give a yes or a no answer or dignify that with a response. I wasn't able to find the clip. Otherwise, I would have played it. So, the thing that I'd like to conclude here with, and is relevant to this clip, relevant to people like Geeta who continue to repeat this claim that is popular among prosecutors. This idea that WikiLeaks caused some kind of harm to U.S. officials is not even one that Secretary of Defense Robert Gates believed when he was part of the Obama administration in 2010. So let's watch this clip, and then we will wrap up this segment.
But let me just offer some perspective of somebody who's been at this a long time. Every other government in the world knows the United States government leaks like a sieve. And it has for a long time. And I dragged this up the other day when I was looking at some of these prospective releases. There's a quote from John Adams. How can a government go on publishing all their negotiations with foreign nations? I know not. To me, it appears as dangerous and pernicious as it is novel. When we went to real congressional oversight of intelligence in the mid-70s, there was a broad view that no other foreign intelligence service would ever share information with us again if we were going to share it all with the Congress. Those fears all proved unfounded. Now, I've heard the impact of these releases on our foreign policy described as a meltdown, as a game changer, and so on. I think those descriptions are fairly significantly overwrought. The fact is, governments deal with the United States because it's in their interest, not because they like us, not because they trust us, and not because they believe we can keep secrets. Some governments deal with us because they fear us, some because they respect us, most because they need us. We are still essentially, as has been said before, the indispensable nation. So other nations will continue to deal with us. They will continue to work with us. We will continue to share sensitive information with one another. Is this embarrassing? Yes. Is it awkward? Yes. Consequences for U.S. foreign policy? I think fairly modest.
Significantly overwrought. Even Robert Gates, the Secretary of Defense, didn't think that the disclosures caused any lasting damage to the United States. And yet, people like Geeta are saying that it's justified to continue this political prosecution, just as the US government, the so-called indispensable nation, as Robert Gates put it, would want. They would want broadcasting networks in allied states to speak like that and do their bidding, not think independently. And so Geeta's performing a role that will win her praise within the halls of power of the United States. But I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing to be proud of, receiving such praise, because the U.S. is increasingly implicated in war crimes and other human rights abuses throughout the world. And in this case, they're implicated in a political prosecution against a publisher. So thank you for watching this video. And if you would like more, go to thedissenter.org. If you go to thedissenter.org, you can subscribe to this newsletter where you'll be able to receive in your inbox reporting on whistleblowers, the latest updates on WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange and the extradition case, coverage of the war on WikiLeaks, and other press freedom stories that relate to issues of whistleblowing. Thank you. I'll be back soon with another video.